Greetings. I hope that each of you are doing well. I am about to go over the week 3 assignment. It is my hopes that the information that I share will provide some guidance and insight as you work through your assignment. After you view this video, if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. So this week, we're talking about Jesus as Messiah. And so I'm about to share my screen with you so that we can walk through these notes together. So Jesus as Messiah. So when you look at the required readings and resources, the reading for this week's assignment is found in chapter 8 of our textbook on pages 261 through 305. And then also these are the readings that have been assigned from the hard sayings of Jesus. It is my understanding that this particular book may be also downloaded as an ebook. I'm not certain on that, but I believe it is available as an ebook. So if you do not have this, this is something that you may want to check into. There's a link as well regarding the Sermon on the Mount. And then also other recommended readings and resources. If you have not had an opportunity to delve into some of these, I would like to encourage you to do so. So as it relates to the actual assignment this week, you will discover what Matthew did to communicate his picture of Jesus through events, words, actions of Jesus, theological themes, and historical settings. So this week's assignment essentially follows the same format as last week's as it relates to the Gospel of Mark. So after completing the assigned reading, write a 750 to 1,000-word essay that details how Matthew portrays Jesus as the Messiah using the above emphasized bolded means. Also, note how Matthew relates the passion of Jesus as Messiah. Your paper must include 5 references to the textbook and be in proper APA format. One of the things I like to mention is that according to APA, if you do also incorporate scriptures or other biblical references, those also should be listed on your reference page. There's an example of that in the new section of D2L. If you look at the APA attachment, and you'll see once again an example of how to list your biblical references on the reference page. Your work will be evaluated according to the essay rubric embedded in the assignment Dropbox. If you've not had an opportunity to do so, I'd like to encourage you also when you are working on your assignments to take a look at the rubric. That way you can keep in mind the criteria that you're being evaluated against. So as we look at the events found in the Gospel of Matthew, I just provided a couple of examples like I did in a previous video. So events, you can find those basically starting on page 271 through 296 in your textbook. The examples that I provided here as it relates to events is the birth of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, the calling of the first disciples, Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 22, and then also Peter's confession of Christ, Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 20. There are many other events, but these are once again examples that I've identified here. And then words of Christ. Once again, pages 271 through 296. In Matthew's gospel, one of the things that Strauss points out is that the book is somewhat of a narrative that is arranged in a topical sense. And so it's a little, excuse me, it is structured a little different than the Gospel of Mark. Words, examples that we find there is the Sermon on the Mount. We discussed that recently. Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7, parable of the lost sheep. That was also in our discussion, as well as the parable of the talents. Parable of the lost sheep, Matthew chapter 18, verses 10 through 14, and then parable of the talents, Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. And then here we have actions of Jesus. And when you read these pages, basically, Strauss kind of intertwine or combine various elements of events, words, and actions of Jesus. So you'll find these things kind of overlapping throughout these pages that have been identified here. So you have where Jesus heals a paralytic, Matthew chapter 9, verses 1 through 8. Jesus feeds 4,000, Matthew chapter 15, verses 29 through 39. And then Jesus cleanses the temple, Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 through 17. Theological themes. These are the theological themes that have been identified by the author of Promise Fulfillment and Climax of Salvation History. That's found on page 296 of your textbook. The statement here is the genealogy, the formula, quotations, and titles of Jesus, the typologies, all of these point to a common theme. Through Jesus the Messiah, God has brought salvation to his people, and this offer now extends to all people everywhere. Once again, this is found on page 296. Another theological theme that has been identified is the kingdom of heaven. I stated this in a previous video. The Revealed Bible Dictionary states that the kingdom of God is a phrase used to express the idea of rule of God on earth. So in Matthew's presentation, this is what Strauss has to say about it. In Matthew's presentation of salvation history is closely related to his perspective on the kingdom of God. In Jewish fashion, Matthew refers to the designation kingdom of heaven over the kingdom of God out of reverence. So the Jew, or that in the Jewish culture, they reverence the name of God itself. They considered the name to be holy, so they would not basically state God's, what they refer to as his personal name. So they would, out of reference, once again, they would coin the phrase kingdom of heaven rather than kingdom of God. And then another theological theme is Jesus and the law. You find that on pages 298 through 300. The author tells us that Jesus speaks more about the Old Testament law in Matthew than in the other Gospels. Jesus states this in Matthew chapter 5. And once again, if you recall, chapter 5 begins the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, verses 17 through 19. Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or tittle, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Once again, you see a phrase kingdom of heaven being stated by Jesus. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness or behavior of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. So I want to point out something. With this being a course in ethics, this has a lot of ethical implications. when Jesus makes this statement, except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness or behavior of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. What Jesus is essentially doing is that he is really heightening or calling to attention the need for ethical behavior, righteous behavior, improved morality. So the author also states New Covenant believers then have not a lower standard of righteousness, but a higher standard, because the law is now written on their hearts rather than on tablets of stone. And then he makes a reference to Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33. This information, once again, is found on page 299 of your textbook. I went ahead and looked at Jeremiah chapter 31 and 33, verse 33, but I wanted to just give more of a context in which this verse is quoted. So this is what it says, beginning at verse 31 in Jeremiah chapter 31. It says, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, or agreement, or rule, or words they break. Although I was an husband to them, said the Lord. In other words, he was a provider. He took care of them. He loved them. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, said the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. Once again, going back to this, he's writing his words, the way we should live. He's writing it in our hearts, that our behavior may change. So once again, this has a lot of implications regarding one's ethical behavior. It lifts up the standard of ethics. I write it in their hearts and will be their God, and they shall be my people, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord. Why? For they shall know me, from the least of them until the greatest of them, said the Lord. They shall know me. Gnosko in the Greek, which essentially means to have a relationship. It's more than an intellectual knowledge of God, but it's just having a relationship. From the least of them to the greatest of them, said the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity and I will remember their sin no more. So once again, when Jesus makes this, he is really heightening the level and calling attention to one's behavior, their ethics, the way we live. When we look at the narrative and theological purpose, the author states this: the primary purpose of Matthew's gospel is to demonstrate that Jesus is the fulfillment of Jewish hopes for the Messiah. Another thing stated, a second narrative purpose is to call the church to greater faith and trust in their risen and ever-present Lord. I want to go ahead and touch on the historical settings. So you have these areas here, going back to them, that we're to look upon and try to provide our reflections for in the assignment. And that is, what did you discover? How did Matthew communicate, and what did he do to communicate his picture of Jesus through events, words, actions of Jesus, theological things, and historical settings? So once again, going back to historical settings, the authorship is attributed to Matthew. He's also referred to as Levi. You'll find this reference to him being called Levi in the Gospel of Mark. Setting an occasion. When you look at the textbook for the course, it states that the proposed area is Antioch in Syria. The date ranges from late 50s to 80s or 90s, late AD 50s to 80s or 90s. According to Strauss, the date remains elusive. That's on page 304. Purpose and occasion. So when we look at the purpose, Gospel of Matthew presents the life and ministry of Jesus as a fulfillment of the long-awaited Messiah, David's son and heir to the kingdom. More than the other Gospels, Matthew focuses on the many ways that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament promises and God's grand plan of salvation for Israel and the world. There's a book called The Bible Overview, and that's on page 171. It's an excellent book. I would recommend if you'd like to just delve deeper into the studies of the Gospels. This is or other books of the Bible, because it covers the entire Bible. It has all 66 books referenced in this particular book. And so it would be a great read if that's something you would like to look into. If you do not have any Bible study tools, there's an online site called Bible Study Tools that is also very helpful. So I just thought I'd share just a couple of things with you that would be helpful as you delve deeper into your studies. So once again, just want to provide some information to you that will be helpful as you continue your studies and work through your week through assignment. If you do have any questions or comments, please, once again, do not hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. Thank you so much and have a great evening.